When the gunshot echoed through Graceland at 3 a.m. on a cold February night in 1974, everyone in the mansion froze. Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, had just pulled out a .22 caliber pistol and fired a bullet directly into his brand-new RCA television set. The reason? Robert Goulet's face appeared on the screen during a late-night variety show rerun. But this wasn't about Robert Goulet. This wasn't about the TV. This was about a man slowly losing his grip on reality, spiraling deeper into paranoia and prescription drug addiction, desperately trying to control a world that had spun completely out of his control. And what happened in the hours after that gunshot would reveal just how far the king had fallen. Graceland, February 1974. The Bay mansion that had once been filled with laughter and music and life now felt more like a mausoleum. Elvis had been living there in near isolation for weeks, rarely leaving his bedroom, sleeping during the day, and prowling the halls at night like a ghost haunting his own home. His marriage to Priscilla had ended in divorce the previous year. His daughter Lisa Marie visited only occasionally, according to the custody arrangement. His closest friends had either been fired or had quit, unable to watch him destroy himself anymore. The Memphis Mafia, once a loyal brotherhood, had fractured into factions, some still clinging to Elvis out of loyalty or paycheck dependency, others keeping their distance to preserve their own sanity. The pills had taken over. Uppers to wake him up, downers to put him back to sleep, painkillers for his back, his knees, his endless list of real and imagined ailments. His personal physician, Dr. Nicopolis, Dr. Nick to everyone at Graceland, prescribed them all, convinced he was helping Elvis manage his pain when really he was enabling a full-blown addiction. Elvis would take a handful of pills, fall asleep for 4 hours, wake up disoriented and angry, take more pills to level out, and the cycle would continue, day after day, week after week, month after month. On this particular night, Elvis had been awake since midnight. He'd called down to the kitchen for a peanut butter and banana sandwich, his favorite comfort food, the one thing from his childhood that still tasted the same. Then he'd settled into the TV room, a small den off his bedroom that he'd converted into his personal screening room. 3 television sets lined one wall. He liked to watch multiple channels at once, flipping between them with the remote controls, comparing the news coverage, the entertainment shows, the late-night reruns. He was wearing his usual at-home outfit, black silk pajama pants, a matching robe hanging open, gold chains around his neck, rings on nearly every finger. His hair, usually so carefully styled, hung limp and greasy. He hadn't shaved in 3 days. His face was puffy from the medication, his eyes bloodshot and glassy. At 39 years old, Elvis Presley looked like a man 20 years older. He'd been watching an old episode of The Hollywood Palace, a variety show from the mid-60s. The host that particular episode was Robert Goulet, the smooth-voiced Canadian crooner who'd made his name on Broadway and was now a regular on the Las Vegas circuit. Elvis knew Goulet, not personally. They'd never actually met, but he knew of him. Everyone in the entertainment industry knew Robert Goulet, and Elvis hated him. It wasn't rational. It wasn't justified. It was pure, irrational hatred born from paranoia and pills and the toxic combination of too much time alone with his own thoughts. Elvis had convinced himself, God knows how or why, that Robert Goulet had disrespected him somehow. Maybe it was something Goulet had said in an interview years ago. Maybe it was the way Goulet sang, all smooth and polished, everything Elvis felt he'd lost in himself. Maybe it was just that Goulet represented everything Elvis wasn't anymore. Successful, stable, in control. Or maybe, more likely, Goulet had done absolutely nothing, and Elvis's drug-addled brain had simply latched onto him as a convenient target for all the anger and frustration and self-hatred that Elvis couldn't direct at himself. Whatever the reason, When Robert Goulet's face appeared on that television screen at 3 a.m., singing some forgettable show tune with that infuriating smile, something inside Elvis snapped. He stood up abruptly, the sudden movement making him dizzy. He steadied himself against the wall, his vision swimming from the pills. Then he walked to his bedroom, opened the drawer of his nightstand, and pulled out his .22 caliber pistol, one of dozens of guns he kept scattered throughout Graceland. Elvis loved guns, collected them, carried them, found comfort in their weight and their power. He walked back to the TV room, aimed the pistol at the center television set, the one showing Robert Goulet's smiling face, and pulled the trigger. Bang! The gunshot was deafening in the small room. The television screen exploded in a shower of glass and sparks. Smoke poured from the ruined set. The acrid smell of gunpowder filled the air. And Elvis just stood there, gun still raised, staring at the destroyed television like he couldn't quite believe what he'd just done. But here's what nobody knew yet, and what would make this night so much more tragic than just a celebrity having a temper tantrum. This wasn't the first time Elvis had shot a television, and it wouldn't be the last. This was a pattern, a symptom of something much deeper and more dangerous than anyone around him was willing to admit. Within seconds, people came running. Charlie Hodge, one of Elvis's longest-serving companions, burst through the door first. Boss, what happened? Are you okay?" Elvis slowly lowered the gun, a strange smile playing on his lips. "Robert Goulet was on my TV." Charlie stared at him, then at the smoking ruin of the television set, then back at Elvis. "So you shot it?" He had it coming. Elvis's voice was calm, matter of fact, like shooting the television was the most reasonable response in the world. More people appeared in the doorway. Billy Smith, Elvis's cousin. Joe Esposito, one of the few original Memphis Mafia members still on the payroll. And Mary Jenkins, one of the housekeepers, her eyes wide with fear. "Elvis, honey, are you hurt?" Mary asked, her voice shaking. "I'm fine." Elvis walked past all of them, gun still in his hand, and headed toward the kitchen. "I need another sandwich." The group exchanged worried glances. This wasn't normal. Even by Graceland's extremely abnormal standards, this was concerning. But what could they do? Call the police? On Elvis Presley? In his own home? For shooting his own television? It's not like it was illegal. Dangerous, yes. Concerning, absolutely. But not illegal. Joe Esposito followed Elvis to the kitchen, watching as his boss, his friend, made himself a peanut butter and banana sandwich with hands that shook slightly. "Elvis, man, we need to talk about this. You can't just go around shooting things when you get upset." Elvis turned to face him, and for just a moment, Joe saw something in his eyes that made his blood run cold. Not anger, not defiance, but emptiness. Like Elvis was looking at him from somewhere very far away, from some dark place Joe couldn't reach. "Why not?" Elvis asked quietly. "It's my house, my TV, my gun. If I want to shoot my own television in my own home, who's going to stop me?" "That's not the point, man. The point is, I'm tired, Joe." Elvis's voice cracked. "I'm so goddamn tired. I'm tired of people telling me what to do. Tired of people judging me. Tired of pretending everything's fine when it's not. So I shot a TV. So what? Maybe it felt good. Maybe for 5 seconds, I felt like I had control over something in my life." Joe didn't know what to say to that. What could he say? Elvis wasn't wrong. His life was spiraling out of control. The divorce, the career problems, the health issues, the isolation. The pills were making everything worse, but they were also the only thing helping Elvis cope with the unbearable weight of being Elvis Presley. And that's when everything changed. Because in the kitchen, at 3:15 a.m., standing in front of a peanut butter and banana sandwich, Elvis Presley had a moment of clarity that would haunt everyone who witnessed it. He set down the sandwich, looked at Joe with tears streaming down his face, and said, I don't know who I am anymore, Joe. I look in the mirror, and I don't recognize the man looking back. I wake up, and I don't know where I am or what day it is. I take so many pills I can't remember what's real and what's a dream. And the worst part? The absolute worst part? I don't even care anymore. I just want it to stop. All of it. Just stop. Joe reached out to hug him, but Elvis pulled away. Don't! Please, I can't! If you're nice to me right now, I'm gonna completely fall apart. And I can't do that. I can't be weak. The king can't be weak. Elvis, you're not... Get out! Elvis's voice was suddenly hard again, the vulnerable moment gone as quickly as it had appeared. Everyone get out. I want to be alone. Boss, I don't think... Get out! Elvis picked up the gun from the counter where he'd set it down. Not in a threatening way, but the implication was clear. Now, Joe left. They all left. What else could they do? You couldn't force Elvis to accept help. You couldn't make him see how bad things had gotten. All you could do was hope that tomorrow he'd wake up and be the old Elvis, the real Elvis, the Elvis they all remembered and loved. But tomorrow never came. Not really, because after that night, things only got worse. But wait, you haven't seen the biggest surprise yet. Because the TV incident wasn't an isolated event. Over the next 3 years, Elvis would shoot at least 4 more televisions, 2 mirrors, a chandelier, and on one particularly bad night, several holes in his bedroom ceiling. Each time, it was triggered by something different. A news report about his weight gain, a comedian making a joke about him, a commercial featuring a celebrity he'd convinced himself was his enemy, or sometimes nothing at all. Just the unbearable weight of existence combined with prescription drugs and loaded firearms. The people around Elvis developed a routine. When they heard a gunshot, they'd rush to see what he'd destroyed this time. They'd clean up the mess, replace the item, and pretend it never happened. They'd make jokes about it. Well, there goes another TV. They'd laugh nervously, because if they didn't laugh, they'd have to confront the horrifying reality that Elvis was deeply, dangerously unwell, and nobody was doing anything to help him. The gun incidents became Graceland legend. Visitors would be shown the bullet holes in the walls and ceilings like they were historical landmarks. That's where Elvis shot the TV because Robert Goulet was on, they'd say, laughing. And that's where he shot the chandelier because it was making too much noise. Dark tourism for a man who was still alive, but slowly dying. And Elvis? He seemed almost proud of it. He'd tell the stories himself, laughing about the time he shot the TV, making it sound like a funny anecdote instead of what it really was, a cry for help that nobody wanted to hear. His doctor would adjust his medication. His friends would stage half-hearted interventions that Elvis would charm or threaten his way out of. His father Vernon would wring his hands and worry about money, because replacing televisions and repairing bullet damage wasn't cheap. But he wouldn't actually do anything to address the root problem, and Elvis would continue his slow spiral, punctuated by moments of violence against inanimate objects that represented all the things he couldn't control. But what you're seeing now is just the beginning. Because the gun incidents were symptoms of something much deeper, a profound disconnection from reality that would only get worse as Elvis's addiction progressed and his isolation deepened. The night after the Robert Goulet incident, Elvis called a meeting of his remaining inner circle. They gathered in the living room at Graceland, Joe, Charlie, Billy, and a few others, expecting Elvis to apologize or at least acknowledge what had happened. Instead, he spent 2 hours explaining his theory that Robert Goulet was part of a conspiracy against him, that the entertainment industry was trying to destroy his career, that people were out to get him, watching him, plotting against him. It would have been funny if it wasn't so sad. These grown men sitting on Elvis Presley's expensive furniture, nodding along as he described elaborate paranoid fantasies, because what else could they do? Contradict him? Risk losing their jobs, their homes, Their access to the Elvis gravy train? So they nodded and agreed and enabled, and Elvis sank deeper into his delusions. The prescription drug problem got worse. Dr. Nick would later testify that in the final years of Elvis's life, he prescribed over 10,000 pills. Uppers, downers, painkillers, sleeping pills, diet pills, pills to counteract the side effects of other pills. Elvis's body became a pharmaceutical experiment, and nobody with the power to stop it did anything. Hold on. Don't miss this crucial detail, because the gun incident revealed something that everyone around Elvis had been deliberately ignoring. He was suffering from severe mental health issues that had nothing to do with fame or stress or the pressures of celebrity. He needed real psychological help, therapy, psychiatric care, possibly hospitalization. But in 1974, there was still enormous stigma around mental health, especially for someone like Elvis. The king of rock and roll couldn't admit to being depressed or anxious or mentally unstable. It would destroy his image, his career, everything he'd built. So instead, they medicated the symptoms and ignored the disease. They let him shoot televisions and collect guns and spiral into paranoia, because addressing the real problem would have required Elvis to admit he needed help. And Elvis could never, ever admit weakness. The tragedy is that Elvis knew. Deep down in his lucid moments, he knew he was falling apart. There were times when he'd break down and sob, begging his friends to help him, to save him from himself. But then the next day, the walls would be back up, the pills would be back in his system, and he'd be the king again, untouchable, invincible, in control. The gun incidents continued. In March 1974, he shot another TV because a football game wasn't going the way he wanted. In July, he shot a mirror because he didn't like what he saw reflected back at him. In October, he shot holes in his bedroom ceiling because he was convinced someone was in the attic watching him. Each incident more concerning than the last, each one a clearer indication that Elvis was in crisis. And still, nothing changed. The people around him adapted to this new normal. They'd hide the guns when Elvis seemed particularly agitated. They'd buy cheaper televisions, knowing they'd probably be replaced soon anyway. They'd walk on eggshells, trying not to say or do anything that might trigger another episode. Lisa Marie, Elvis's daughter, was shielded from the worst of it. When she visited, her father would pull himself together, take fewer pills, act more normal, be the dad she needed him to be. But she was young, not stupid. She could see something was wrong. She'd find bullet holes in the walls and ask about them, and Elvis would make up some story about target practice or accidents. She'd notice how many pills he took and ask if he was sick, and he'd tell her it was just medicine for his back. She loved her father desperately, but even she was starting to realize that the man in Graceland wasn't quite the same person she'd known as a little girl. You won't believe this, but the gun incidents were actually the least of Elvis's problems. They were dramatic and visible, but they were symptoms, not the disease. The real problem was the crushing loneliness, the crippling self-doubt, the paralyzing fear that he'd peaked, and everything from here on out was just a slow decline into irrelevance. Elvis hadn't had a hit single in years. His movies had stopped being profitable. His concerts were still successful. He could fill arenas, no problem. But even that felt hollow. He'd look out at the crowds of screaming fans and feel nothing. They weren't screaming for him, the real him. They were screaming for an idea, a memory, a version of Elvis Presley that maybe never really existed. He'd gained weight, a lot of weight. The pills and the midnight snacks and the complete lack of exercise had taken their toll. He could still put on a good show. The jumpsuits hid a multitude of sins, and adrenaline could carry him through a 2-hour performance. But afterward, he'd collapse in his dressing room, exhausted and ashamed of what he'd become. The gun incidents were, in a twisted way, the only times Elvis felt powerful anymore. In those moments, when he pulled the trigger and watched something explode, He felt like he had control. He felt like the king. Even if what he was destroying was his own property, even if the only person he was hurting was himself, at least he was making something happen. At least he was in charge of something, even if it was just destruction. The people at RCA, Elvis's record label, heard about the TV incident. They thought it was hilarious. Elvis shot his own TV. They laughed. That's so Elvis. They even considered using it in marketing. Elvis Presley, so passionate about music, he shoots TVs. But wiser heads prevailed, realizing that mentally unstable drug addict shoots television wasn't quite the image they wanted to promote. Colonel Parker, Elvis's manager, was more concerned about the financial implications. "Those TVs aren't cheap, my boy," he'd say, calculating how much these incidents were costing. But he wouldn't address the underlying issues either. As long as Elvis could still perform and make money, Parker didn't care if he was shooting televisions, shooting drugs, or shooting himself in the foot. Elvis was a commodity, a money-making machine. And you don't take the machine offline for maintenance when it's still producing revenue. The final years of Elvis's life, from 1974 until his death in August 1977, were marked by these escalating incidents of erratic behavior. The gun incidents continued, but they were joined by other concerning signs: sudden weight fluctuations, memory problems, violent mood swings, increasingly bizarre conspiracy theories, and a growing disconnection from reality. His last television shooting incident was in early 1977, about 6 months before he died. He shot a TV because a news program showed footage of him performing, and he didn't like how he looked. He stood in his TV room, staring at the image of himself on screen. Overweight, sweating, struggling to hit notes that used to come so easily. And he emptied the entire clip into the television. 6 shots, 6 bullet holes, 6 moments of trying to destroy the reflection of what he'd become. After that incident, his friends finally tried a real intervention. They sat him down, all of them together, and told him he needed help. Real help, professional help. They begged him to check into a facility, to get clean, to save his own life. Elvis listened quietly. Then he stood up, walked to his room, and locked the door. He didn't come out for 3 days. When he finally emerged, he acted like the intervention had never happened. He smiled and joked and made his famous peanut butter and banana sandwiches. He talked about upcoming concerts and new recording projects. He was the Elvis they all knew and loved, charming and charismatic and larger than life. But his eyes were empty. The light that had made Elvis Presley special, that spark of genuine joy and passion that had captivated the world, was gone. All that remained was the performance, the mask, the king playing the role of the king, even though the real person underneath had already started to die. On August 16, 1977, Elvis Presley was found dead in his bathroom at Graceland. The official cause of death was cardiac arrhythmia, but everyone knew the real cause: prescription drug abuse, years of self-destruction, and the slow suicide of a man who'd lost himself in his own legend. When they cleaned out his bedroom after his death, they found guns everywhere. Loaded pistols in drawers, rifles under the bed, revolvers in the closet. He'd been living in an arsenal, ready to shoot at whatever phantom enemies his paranoid mind conjured up. They also found the bullet holes, dozens of them, in the walls, the ceiling, the furniture. Evidence of every time Elvis had lashed out at his own possessions, trying desperately to feel something, to control something, to matter. Years later, when Graceland was opened to the public as a museum, they covered most of the bullet holes, patched them, painted over them, made the mansion look pristine and perfect, like Elvis's life had been pristine and perfect. But a few holes remain, hidden in corners and closets, silent testimony to the violence of Elvis's final years. And somewhere, in the archives of Graceland, there's a log book, A detailed record kept by the household staff of every television, mirror, and piece of furniture Elvis destroyed. The list is long, disturbingly long, a chronological record of a slow-motion breakdown that everyone watched and nobody stopped. The TV incident, the Robert Goulet incident, became part of Elvis mythology. It's told as a funny story, a quirky anecdote about the king's eccentric behavior. Did you know Elvis once shot his TV because Robert Goulet was on? People say, laughing. It's become a punchline, a fun fact for trivia nights. But it wasn't funny. It was tragic. It was a man drowning and shooting at the water, thinking that would save him. It was a cry for help that was answered with laughter and enablement. It was a symptom of a disease that killed him 3 years later. Robert Goulet, for his part, learned about the incident years after Elvis's death. His response? He laughed. He told the story in interviews, made it part of his act. Elvis Presley shot his TV because of me, he'd say proudly, like it was an honor. Like being the target of a drug-addled man's paranoid rage was something to be celebrated. Maybe he didn't understand. Maybe he couldn't understand. Maybe nobody who wasn't there, who didn't watch Elvis's slow collapse from the inside, could truly understand what that gunshot meant. It meant Elvis was dying and nobody was saving him. It meant the king was drowning in pills and paranoia, and nobody threw him a life preserver. It meant that fame and wealth and talent weren't enough to protect you from your own demons. Sometimes they made those demons stronger. That's the story of the night Elvis shot the television. Not a funny anecdote, not a quirky celebrity tale, but a tragedy, a warning, a moment that crystallized everything that was wrong in Elvis Presley's life and foreshadowed the end that was coming all too soon. And maybe, just maybe, if someone had taken that gunshot seriously, if someone had said, "This isn't funny, this isn't quirky, this is a medical and psychiatric emergency," maybe Elvis would have gotten the help he needed. Maybe he'd have lived longer. Maybe he'd have found peace. But they didn't. So he didn't. And on August 16th, 1977, the music died. The king fell. And the world mourned a man they'd loved but never truly saved. Tell us in the comments. Do you think Elvis's friends should have done more to help him? Is it possible to save someone who doesn't want to be saved? How do we balance respecting someone's autonomy with intervening when they're clearly in crisis? Let us know what city you're watching from today. Subscribe to our channel for more emotional and untold stories of Elvis Presley, the dark side of fame, and the human cost of being a legend. Hit the bell to never miss a story that matters.